The sun was setting behind the Red Canyon walls when Chief Nietzsche finally rode back into the settlement. His horse moved slowly, tired from 3 long days of hunting in the desert heat. The chief's shoulders ached and dust covered every inch of his clothes, but at least the hunt had been good. 2 deer were tied to his horse, enough meat to feed several families for days. As Nietzsche guided his horse through the narrow path between the rock walls, he could hear the usual sounds of evening in the camp. Women were preparing food over fires. Children were playing their last games before darkness fell. And the old men were sitting together, sharing stories and smoking their pipes. Everything seemed normal, peaceful, just as he had left it. But something felt different. Nietzsche couldn't put his finger on it at first. Maybe it was just his tired mind playing tricks on him. He had been thinking about his son during the entire journey home, worrying as he always did. Kaya was 12 years old now, but without his sight, the boy needed constant care. The child had been born with perfect eyes, but a terrible fever when he was just 4 years old had stolen his vision forever. Since then, Kaya's world had been nothing but darkness. The chief's heart grew heavier as he thought about his son. 6 months ago, Kaya's mother had died from another fever that swept through the camp. She had been the one who knew how to care for the boy, who understood his needs, who could calm his fears. Without her, Kaya had become quiet and withdrawn, spending most of his time alone in their dwelling, afraid to move around the camp where he might trip or bump into things. Nietzsche had tried his best to care for his son, but being a chief meant he had many responsibilities. He had to lead hunting parties, settle disputes, meet with other tribal leaders, and plan for his people's safety. There were always soldiers somewhere nearby, always new threats to watch for. He couldn't spend every moment with Kaya, even though his heart ached to do so. That's why he had asked his sister and some of the older women to check on the boy while he was away. They had promised to bring Kaya food and make sure he was safe. It should have been enough. But as Nietzsche approached his dwelling, that strange feeling grew stronger. Then he saw it. Near the fire outside his home, there were 2 figures. One was definitely Kaya, sitting cross-legged on a woven mat. But the other figure made Nietzsche's blood run cold. It was a woman, but not one of his people. Even from a distance, he could see her light-colored hair catching the firelight. Her skin was pale. Her dress was the kind white settlers wore. Though it was torn and dirty, it was one of the captives. 2 weeks ago, his warriors had raided a wagon train that was crossing through Apache territory without permission. The whites never asked, never respected the land or the people who had lived there for generations. They just came with their wagons and their guns, taking whatever they wanted. During that raid, his men had taken several captives, including this woman. Nietzsche had given strict orders that she be kept with the other prisoners, watched carefully by the older women on the far side of the camp. So what was she doing here, sitting beside his son? Nietzsche's hand moved to the knife at his belt. Every muscle in his body tensed. Was Kaya in danger? Had this woman somehow escaped and was now threatening his boy? The chief slid off his horse silently, moving closer with the practiced quietness of a hunter stalking prey. But as he drew near enough to see clearly, what he witnessed made him stop in his tracks. The white woman wasn't threatening Kaya. She was sitting beside him, so close their shoulders almost touched. In front of them was a half-finished basket, the kind the Apache women made for carrying food and supplies. The woman was guiding Kaya's small hands, showing him how to weave the dried grass strands together. She would place his fingers on the basket, let him feel the pattern, then help him find the next strand to add. What shocked Nietzsche even more was the sound coming from his son. Kaya was laughing. It was a light, happy sound that the chief hadn't heard in months, not since before his mother died. The boy's face was bright with concentration and joy as he worked on the basket, his small fingers fumbling a bit but trying hard to follow the woman's gentle guidance. The woman was speaking too, but not in English. She was using Apache words, though her accent was terrible and she spoke slowly, like someone who had just started learning. "Good, very good," she said, her voice soft and encouraging. "Now feel here, feel how the grass goes over and under. Your fingers can see what your eyes cannot." Kaya nodded eagerly, his hands exploring the basket's surface. "I can feel it. It makes a pattern like waves." "Yes, exactly like waves," the woman replied, and there was something in her voice, something warm and sad at the same time, that made Nietzsche hesitate before revealing himself. He stood there in the shadows, his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? Why had she disobeyed his orders? How did she know to teach Kaya this way? And most importantly, why did his son, who had barely spoken or smiled in months, look happier than he had been in half a year? The chief watched as the woman helped Kaya add another strand to the basket. She was patient, never rushing him, never grabbing his hands to do it for him. She let the boy learn at his own pace, make his own mistakes, and figure things out. When Kaya got frustrated and wanted to give up, she encouraged him gently, telling him that all difficult things take time to learn. Nietzsche's protective fury began to mix with confusion. This was not what he expected. He had prepared himself for danger, for a threat to his son. Instead, he was witnessing something he had thought impossible. Someone outside his family understanding how to help Kaya, how to make him feel capable instead of helpless. But she was still a captive. She had still disobeyed orders, and she was still a white woman, one of the people who had brought so much pain and loss to his tribe. The chief stepped forward into the firelight, his shadow falling across the two figures by the fire. The woman looked up immediately, her body going stiff, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and defiance. But she didn't pull away from Kaya. Instead, she stayed right where she was, as if protecting the boy from whatever punishment might come. Kaya's head turned toward the sound of footsteps he recognized. "Father? Father, you're back!" The boy's face lit up with genuine happiness, something that both warmed and broke Nietzsche's heart at the same time. The chief stood there, looking down at his son and the mysterious white woman who had somehow brought light back into the boy's dark world. He knew he should be angry. He knew he should drag her away and punish her for disobeying. But looking at Kaya's smiling face, at the half-finished basket that represented hope and progress, Nietzsche found himself frozen with uncertainty. What exactly had he discovered here? And what was he supposed to do about it? The fire crackled in the silence as three people faced an unexpected moment that would change all their lives forever. Chief Nietzsche stood perfectly still, his eyes moving between his son and the white woman. The firelight danced across their faces, creating shifting shadows that made the whole scene feel almost dreamlike. But this was no dream. This was real, and the chief needed answers. "Kaya, go inside," Nietzsche said firmly, using his chief's voice, the one that expected no argument. The boy's smile faded immediately. His small hands reached out, searching for the woman beside him. "But father, we're not finished with the basket." And she was going to tell me more about inside, now. The words came out harsher than Nietzsche intended, but fear for his son's safety made him stern. Kaya's face crumpled with disappointment, but he knew better than to disobey his father. The woman helped him stand, her hands gentle and steady as she made sure he had his balance. She even handed him his walking stick, the one Kaya rarely used because he was embarrassed by it. "Go on," she whispered to the boy in her broken Apache. "Your father wants to talk. It's okay." As Kaya slowly made his way into the dwelling, counting steps the way his mother had taught him, Nietzsche kept his eyes fixed on the woman. She watched the boy go with obvious concern, then turned to face the chief. She was thin, probably hadn't been eating much since the capture. Her dress was filthy and torn in several places. Her face was sunburned, her lips cracked from the desert heat, but her eyes were steady, not looking away from his hard stare. Most captives looked at the ground when he approached. They trembled and begged. This one stood straight, her chin up, waiting. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also something else. Determination, maybe, or stubbornness. "You were ordered to stay with the other captives," Nietzsche said in English. He spoke the language well enough, had learned it from traders and missionaries over the years. "You were told not to wander the camp. You disobeyed." The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, I disobeyed." "Do you know what happens to captives who disobey?" The chief's hand rested on his knife, a clear threat. "I can guess." Her voice was quiet but steady. "But I would disobey again." Nietzsche felt his anger rising. "You dare to—" I heard him crying. The woman's words cut through his anger like a knife through leather. 3 days ago, in the middle of the night, I heard a child crying, calling for his mother, calling for someone, anyone, and no one came. The chief's jaw tightened. He knew Kaya cried at night. His sister had mentioned it. But she had her own children to care for, her own family. She couldn't sit with Kaya every night, couldn't be there every time the boy woke up frightened and alone in his darkness. The woman continued, her words coming faster now. "I listened for an hour. He cried and nobody went to him. I know I'm a prisoner. I know I should stay where I'm put. But I couldn't listen to that anymore. Her voice cracked slightly. I couldn't leave a child suffering when I could help. You don't know our ways, Nietzsche argued, but his voice had lost some of its edge. You don't know what is proper. A captive touching the chief's son. I know a frightened child when I hear one. The woman's eyes were suddenly bright with unshed tears, but she blinked them back. I know what it sounds like when a boy has lost his mother and doesn't understand why the world has become so dark and scary. Something in the way she said those words made Nietzsche pause. There was too much understanding there, too much pain. This wasn't just sympathy. This was something deeper. How do you know these things? He asked, his voice quieter now. How do you know how to help him? The woman was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I had a son. His name was Thomas. He was born blind. Nietzsche felt something shift in his chest. Was? He died 2 years ago. He was 8 years old. She wrapped her arms around herself as if trying to hold together pieces that might fall apart. There was cholera in our settlement. It took my husband first, then my boy 3 days later. I couldn't save either of them. The chief said nothing, recognizing the particular pain of a parent who has lost a child. In his tribe, everyone understood that loss. Death was no stranger in their world. The woman took a shaky breath and continued. Thomas was born without sight. The midwife said he would never be able to do anything, that he would always be helpless. But I didn't believe that. I couldn't believe it. So I learned everything I could. I talked to every doctor, every teacher, every person who might know something about how to help a blind child. She looked up at Nietzsche, and in the firelight, he could see the fierce love of a mother who would do anything for her child. I taught Thomas to use his other senses. I made maps he could feel with his hands. I taught him to recognize people by their footsteps, to identify plants by their smell and texture. By the time he was 8, he could move around our house and yard as well as any seeing child. He could do chores, help with cooking, even play with other children. And then he died. Nietzsche's words were a statement, not a question. And then he died. The woman's voice broke on those words. All that work, all those years of teaching him to thrive, and then he was just gone. My husband, too. I had nothing left, no reason to stay in that place where everything reminded me of what I'd lost. So I joined a wagon train heading west. I thought maybe starting over somewhere new would help. And then my warriors attacked your wagon train. She nodded. Yes, killed most of the men, took some of us prisoner. I was sure I would die too. Honestly, I didn't much care at that point. She looked toward the dwelling where Kaya had gone. But then I heard your son crying in the night and something woke up inside me. He sounded just like Thomas used to sound when he was scared, when he didn't understand why he couldn't see like other children. The woman met Nietzsche's eyes again. I know I'm your prisoner. I know I should be grateful just to be alive. But when I heard Kaya crying, when I found him the next morning sitting alone, afraid to move, afraid to explore, I saw my Thomas. I saw a bright, capable boy being treated like he was helpless. And I couldn't stand by and watch that. Not again. Nietzsche felt his anger draining away, replaced by something more complicated. This woman hadn't approached Kaya out of defiance or disrespect. She had done it because she was a mother who couldn't bear to see a child suffer, a mother who knew things about raising a blind child that no one else in his camp knew. You should have asked permission, he said, but his voice held no real force now. Would you have given it? She challenged gently. Would you have let a white captive near your son if I'd asked? The chief had no answer for that because they both knew the truth. He would have refused. He would have sent her away, and Kaya would still be sitting alone in the darkness, crying for his mother, growing more withdrawn and fearful every day. What is your name? Nietzsche asked finally. I am called Grace. She said it simply without lowering her eyes. Grace. Nietzsche tested the name. It was a strange word in English, though he knew it meant something about kindness from their god. He gestured toward the dwelling. In 3 days you have done what I could not do in 6 months. My son is laughing again. He is learning. How? Grace's expression softened. Because I treat him like he's capable, not broken. I show him that his hands can see what his eyes cannot. I teach him that being blind doesn't mean being helpless. It just means learning to move through the world differently. She paused. Your son is smart and brave. He just needs someone to show him how to use what he has instead of mourning what he's lost. The chief looked at this thin, Sunburned white woman with her torn dress and cracked lips, and he saw something he hadn't expected to find in a captive. He saw hope for his son. Chief Nietzsche didn't sleep well that night. He lay on his sleeping mat, staring up at the smoke hole in the roof of his dwelling, watching stars appear and disappear as smoke from the dying fire drifted past. Beside him, Kaya slept peacefully for the first time in months, his breathing steady and calm. The boy wasn't crying out in his sleep, wasn't whimpering with nightmares. That alone told the chief he had a difficult decision to make. The next morning, Nietzsche called a meeting with his closest advisors. There were 5 of them, 3 senior warriors, 1 medicine man, and 1 elder woman who had lived through more winters than anyone could count. They gathered in the chief's dwelling while Kaya sat outside, working on his basket with fierce concentration. "I have a matter to discuss," Nietzsche began, using the formal tone reserved for serious tribal business. "It concerns my son and one of the captives." The warriors exchanged glances. Everyone in the camp had already heard about the white woman sitting with the chief's blind son. In a small settlement like theirs, news traveled faster than wildfire. Red Hawk, the oldest of the warriors, spoke first. "The white woman should be punished for disobeying orders. She was told to stay with the other captives. If we let one prisoner wander freely, the others will think they can do the same." "She wasn't wandering," Nietzsche replied carefully. "She was helping my son. Helping or not, she broke the rules," another warrior insisted. "What kind of chief allows a captive to ignore his commands?" The elder woman, whose name was Desba, made a dismissive sound. "What kind of men care more about rules than about a grieving child?" She looked directly at Red Hawk. "I was the one who was supposed to check on young Kaya while the chief was away. I did, but I have 14 grandchildren of my own to watch. I couldn't sit with him every moment. This white woman did what I could not do. She gave the boy comfort." "She's a white woman," Red Hawk argued. "Who knows what poison she might put in the child's head? She could be teaching him to betray his own people. By teaching him to weave a basket." Desba's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Yes, that's clearly part of some evil plan." Nietzsche held up his hand for silence. "I understand everyone's concerns, but there is more to this than you know." He then told them what Grace had revealed the night before about her own blind son, about the years she spent learning to help him, about the knowledge she possessed. The medicine man, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward with interest. "This woman knows special ways to help blind children? This is powerful knowledge. Among our people, when someone loses their sight, they often become a burden to their families. But you're saying this woman taught her son to live like any other child?" "That's what she claims," Nietzsche confirmed. "And from what I've seen with Kaya in just 3 days, I believe her." Desba nodded thoughtfully. "The boy is different already. Yesterday I saw him walking around the camp with his stick, counting his steps, calling out greetings to people as he passed. He recognized me by my footsteps. When has he ever done that before? He used to just sit in the dwelling, too afraid to move." "It could be a trick," Red Hawk insisted, though his voice held less certainty now. "Maybe she's pretending to help the boy to gain our trust." "To what purpose?" Nietzsche challenged. "Where would she run to? We're deep in Apache territory. She has no horse, no weapons, no food. Even if she escaped the camp, she'd die in the desert within 2 days." The warriors had no good answer to that. Nietzsche took a deep breath. "I want to make an arrangement with this woman. She will continue to teach Kaya, to help him learn the skills he needs. In return, she will be given better food, better clothing, and she may move freely in the camp." "You're giving a captive privileges?" Red Hawk looked shocked. "The other prisoners will demand the same treatment." "The other prisoners are not teaching my son to live again," Nietzsche said firmly, his voice taking on the commanding tone of a chief who had made his decision. "I don't care what the others think. I care about Kaya. For 6 months I have watched my son fade away, becoming a shadow of himself. This woman has brought him back to life in 3 days. That is worth more than any concerns about rules and appearances." The medicine man spoke again. "If the chief allows this, I support it. We have much to learn from someone who knows how to help those without sight. Perhaps this woman could teach others in our tribe as well. We have 2 other blind people in the camp, both injured in battles. They sit idle, feeling useless. Maybe they too could benefit from this knowledge." Desba smiled. "The medicine man speaks wisdom. Why should we let pride prevent us from learning something valuable? The white people have much that we hate, but if one of them has knowledge that can help our people, we should use it." Red Hawk still looked unhappy, but he could see he was outnumbered. Do what you think is right, Chief, but keep a close watch on this woman. Trust is something that must be earned slowly, not given freely. I agree, Nietzsche said. She will be watched, but she will also be allowed to help my son. After the meeting ended and the advisors left, Nietzsche went outside to find Grace. She was sitting with Kaya again, this time teaching him to identify different types of dried herbs by their smell. She had several small pouches spread on a cloth, and Kaya was sniffing each one, his face scrunched up in concentration. This one smells sweet, like flowers, the boy said, holding one pouch. Good, that's sage, Grace confirmed. Now try this one. Kaya sniffed another pouch and wrinkled his nose. Ugh, this one smells strong like medicine. That's cedar. It's used for ceremonies and healing. Your nose is learning fast. Nietzsche approached them and Grace immediately tensed, probably expecting punishment for once again sitting with the boy. Instead, the chief sat down across from them, crossing his legs in a relaxed position. I have made a decision, he announced. Grace met his eyes, her expression carefully neutral, preparing herself for whatever was coming. You will continue to teach my son, Nietzsche said, every day for as long as it takes to give him the skills he needs. You will teach him everything you taught your own child. In return, you will receive better treatment. More food, new clothing, freedom to move through the camp is needed. Grace's eyes widened in surprise. Whatever she had expected, it wasn't this. You're allowing me to keep helping Kaya? I'm not just allowing it, I'm requesting it. Nietzsche glanced at his son, who was listening to every word with barely contained excitement. But understand this, Grace, you are still a captive. You cannot leave the camp. You cannot have weapons. If you try to escape or if you harm my son in any way, your life will end immediately. Do you understand? I understand, Grace said quietly. But I have no desire to escape and nowhere to go even if I did. And I would never harm Kaya, never. Why should I believe that? Nietzsche challenged. We killed people in your wagon train. We are your enemies. Grace was silent for a moment, choosing her words carefully. You killed people in my wagon train, yes. But those people weren't my friends. They were just strangers I was traveling with. People who barely spoke to me because I was a widow traveling alone. Most of them treated me like I was bad luck. She looked at Kaya, her expression softening. But this boy, he reminds me so much of my Thomas. When I help him, when I see him learn and grow, it feels like I'm keeping my own son's memory alive. It feels like all those years I spent learning to help Thomas weren't wasted. So no, Chief Nietzsche, I won't try to escape. For the first time since my son died, I have a purpose again. Why would I run away from that? Nietzsche studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but found none. He saw only the fierce love of a mother who had lost her child and found a way to channel that love toward another. Very well, he said finally. We have an agreement. He stood up, preparing to leave, then paused. One more thing. Teach him not just to survive, but to thrive. Teach him that his blindness is not a curse. Can you do that? Grace nodded. I can do that. That's exactly what I plan to do. Kaya, who had been listening to the entire conversation, suddenly spoke up. Father, does this mean Grace can stay? She's not going away. Nietzsche looked at his son's hopeful face and felt his heart squeeze. Yes, my son. She will stay and teach you many things. The boy's face broke into the biggest smile Nietzsche had seen in half a year. Thank you, Father. Thank you. As the chief walked away, he heard Grace and Kaya resume their lesson, the woman's patient voice mixing with the boy's eager questions. He had made the right decision, he was sure of it. But he also knew that this arrangement would change things in ways he couldn't yet predict. In his heart, Nietzsche understood that he had just set something in motion that would affect not just his son, but perhaps his entire way of seeing the world. And that thought was both exciting and deeply unsettling. The summer days grew longer and hotter as weeks passed in the canyon settlement. Chief Nietzsche found himself spending more time observing Grace and Kaya than he had originally planned. At first he told himself it was just to make sure the woman wasn't teaching his son anything inappropriate. But gradually he realized he was watching because he was genuinely amazed by what was happening. Grace had transformed his son's daily life completely. Every morning she would arrive at their dwelling just after sunrise and the lessons would begin. But they weren't boring lessons where Kaya had to sit still and listen. Everything Grace taught was practical, active, useful. She taught Kaya to navigate the camp using a long walking stick, At first, the boy had refused to use it, saying it made him look weak. Grace had simply smiled and told him, "A stick isn't a sign of weakness. It's a tool, like a warrior's spear or a hunter's bow. Would you say your father is weak because he uses weapons?" That comparison had changed Kaya's mind immediately. Now he carried his stick everywhere, tapping it ahead of himself as he walked, using it to detect obstacles and changes in terrain. Within 2 weeks, he could walk from his dwelling to the cooking fires, to the water source, and back again without any help. Grace created what she called texture maps for Kaya. She would take pieces of leather and glue different materials onto them: smooth pebbles for the river, rough sand for the desert, dried grass for the meadows. She would have Kaya feel these maps with his hands, describing the layout of the camp and the surrounding area. Soon, Kaya could describe where things were located even though he'd never seen them. One afternoon, Nietzsche watched as Grace taught Kaya to cook simple meals. She guided his hands to feel the heat rising from the fire without getting burned, taught him to judge when meat was cooked by pressing it gently with a stick, showed him how to identify when water was boiling by listening to the sound it made. "Why does he need to know these things?" one of the warriors asked Nietzsche as they watched together. "He's the chief's son. Others will always cook for him. What if one day there is no one else?" Nietzsche replied quietly. "What if he's alone and needs to feed himself?" Grace is right. He needs to be able to care for himself. But it wasn't just practical skills that Grace taught. She also taught Kaya about confidence, about believing in himself. She would tell him stories about her son, Thomas, about all the things the boy had been able to do despite being blind. She told him about a blind musician she had once heard play the piano better than anyone with sight. She told him about blind weavers and craftsmen she had read about in books. "Just because you can't see doesn't mean you can't do amazing things," she would say. "It just means you have to do them differently." Nietzsche began to notice how other people in the camp started treating Kaya differently too. Instead of speaking to him like he was a fragile child, they talked to him normally. When Kaya walked through camp with his stick, people would call out greetings and he would respond, recognizing them by their voices. Children who used to avoid playing with him now invited him to join their games, with Grace showing them how to include him. One evening, Nietzsche asked Grace to sit with him after Kaya had gone to sleep. They sat by the fire outside his dwelling, and for a while neither spoke. Finally, the chief broke the silence. "I need to understand something," he said. "You do all this for Kaya with such patience, such care, but he is not your son. He is the son of the people who captured you, who killed your traveling companions. How can you care for him so deeply?" Grace stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "When my Thomas died, I thought my life as a mother was over. All that knowledge I had gained, all those skills I had learned to help him, they felt useless. I felt useless. What's the point of knowing how to help a blind child when your blind child is gone?" She looked up at Nietzsche, and in the firelight, he could see tears glistening in her eyes. "But then I found Kaya, or maybe he found me, and I realized that maybe Thomas's life wasn't meaningless. Maybe everything I learned while raising him was preparing me for this, for helping another child who needed the same things." "You believe your God planned this?" Nietzsche asked, curious despite himself. "I don't know about planned," Grace said honestly, "but I believe in making meaning from pain. My son died and I couldn't stop that, but I can help your son live better. I can take all that love I had for Thomas and give it to Kaya. That makes the pain bearable somehow." Nietzsche was quiet, processing her words. Then he asked another question that had been bothering him. "Do you hate us? For taking you captive? For killing those people?" Grace considered this carefully. "I was angry at first, terrified. I thought I would die." She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "But hate? No, I don't think I hate you. You're protecting your land, your people. The wagon train was crossing through your territory without permission. From your perspective, we were invaders." She paused. "And honestly, your people have treated me better than my own people did after my husband and son died. At least here I have a purpose." The chief found himself surprised by her answer. Most white captives spent their time crying, begging to be released, cursing their captors. Grace was different. She had somehow found a way to turn tragedy into purpose, captivity into opportunity. "Tell me more about your son," Nietzsche said suddenly. "Tell me about Thomas." Grace's face lit up with a sad but genuine smile. "He was stubborn like Kaya. Once he decided he wanted to do something, nothing could stop him." She laughed softly at a memory. "When he was 6, he decided he wanted to climb the big oak tree in our yard. I told him it was too dangerous, that he might fall.
He said, "Mama, I can feel the branches with my hands."
I can hear how the tree creaks when the branches are weak. I can do this. Did he do it? Naiche asked. He did. Climbed right to the top while I stood below, my heart in my throat, ready to catch him if he fell. But he didn't fall. He sat up there for an hour, feeling the wind, listening to the birds, happier than I'd ever seen him. Grace's eyes were distant, lost in the memory. That's when I realized I couldn't protect him from everything. I had to let him try. Let him fail sometimes, let him succeed, just like any other child. You're teaching me the same lesson with Kaya, Naiche admitted. I wanted to protect him from everything, keep him safe in the dwelling where nothing could hurt him. But that wasn't living. That was just existing. Exactly, Grace agreed. Kaya needs challenges. He needs to struggle sometimes, to figure things out, to feel proud when he accomplishes something difficult. That's how he'll grow strong. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn lower. Finally, Naiche spoke again. There is something I need to tell you. Something I've been thinking about. Grace looked at him, waiting. Kaya's blindness. It wasn't always like this. He was born with perfect eyes. He could see for the first 4 years of his life. Then he got sick with a terrible fever. It lasted for days. When the fever finally broke, he couldn't see anymore. The medicine man said his spirit had traveled too far into the darkness and lost its way back to the light. But his eyes still looked normal. Grace said thoughtfully, I've noticed that. They don't look damaged. What does that mean? Naiche asked. I'm not sure yet, Grace admitted. But I'd like to examine his eyes more closely when we have good sunlight. Would you allow that? Naiche nodded slowly. If you think it might help? Yes. What the chief didn't say out loud was how much he had come to trust this white woman with his most precious treasure. Somewhere over the past weeks, Grace had stopped being just a useful captive and had become something more. Not quite family, not quite friend, but something important nonetheless. As Grace stood to leave for the night, heading back to the area where the captives slept, Naiche found himself speaking words he hadn't planned. Thank you, Grace, for giving me my son back. She turned and smiled at him, a real smile that reached her eyes. Thank you for letting me be a mother again, even if just for borrowed time. After she left, Naiche sat alone by the dying fire, thinking about how strange life could be. A few weeks ago, he had seen this woman as nothing more than a captive, maybe an enemy. Now she was the person who understood his son better than anyone, who was teaching the boy skills Naiche himself couldn't teach. The world was more complicated than he had ever imagined. And somehow that complexity had brought something good into his life, even if it came in the most unexpected form. The storm came without much warning, rolling across the desert with the fury that only summer thunderstorms could bring. Lightning split the sky and thunder crashed so loud it seemed to shake the canyon walls. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the camp's dusty paths into streams of rushing water. Most people had taken shelter in their dwellings, waiting for the storm to pass. But Chief Naiche stood at the entrance of his home, watching the lightning with a worried expression. Kaya was terrified of thunderstorms. Even before he lost his sight, loud noises had frightened him. Now, without being able to see the lightning coming, each thunder crash caught him completely by surprise. Inside the dwelling, Grace sat with Kaya, holding the trembling boy close. She was talking to him softly, trying to distract him with stories, but nothing seemed to help. Each boom of thunder made him flinch and whimper. Then, without warning, Kaya's body went stiff. His eyes rolled back and he began to shake violently. Grace recognized what was happening immediately. She had seen it before with Thomas, though not often. Naiche, she called out urgently. Help me! The chief rushed inside to find Kaya in the grip of a seizure, his small body convulsing, foam appearing at the corners of his mouth. Naiche's face went pale with fear. He had seen warriors have seizures after head injuries in battle, but he had never seen his son do this. What's happening to him? Naiche demanded, his voice tight with panic. It's a seizure. He'll be okay, but we need to keep him safe. Grace's voice was calm, taking charge. Help me turn him on his side. We need to make sure he doesn't choke. Together, they carefully positioned Kaya on his side. Grace placed something soft under his head and made sure there was nothing nearby that he could hurt himself on as his body continued to shake. How long does this last? Naiche asked, feeling helpless as he watched his son suffer. Usually just a few minutes. We have to wait it out. Grace's hands were gentle on Kaya's shoulder, keeping him steady. Has this happened before? when he was very young after the fever that took his sight. The medicine man gave him herbs and the shaking stopped. It hasn't happened since, Grace nodded, her mind working. The seizure, the fever, the sudden blindness. Pieces were starting to fit together in a pattern she recognized. After what felt like forever but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes, Kaya's body slowly stopped shaking. He went limp, his breathing heavy and labored. Grace checked his mouth to make sure his tongue was okay, then wiped the foam from his face with a damp cloth. "He'll sleep now," she said quietly. "His body needs to rest after something like that." Nietzsche carefully lifted his son and placed him on his sleeping mat, covering him with a soft blanket. He sat beside Kaya for a long time, just watching him breathe, making sure he was truly okay. Outside, the storm had passed as quickly as it came, leaving everything dripping and fresh. Grace stepped out to give Nietzsche some private time with his son, but the chief followed her outside a few minutes later. "You knew what to do," he said. "You weren't afraid. My Thomas had seizures too a few times. The doctor taught me how to handle them." Grace turned to face him. "Nietzsche, I need to examine Kaya's eyes properly, in full sunlight when he's awake. I need to look closely at them." "Why?" "What are you thinking?" Grace hesitated, not wanting to give false hope, but knowing she needed to be honest. "When you told me he could see before the fever and now seeing the seizures and the way his eyes look, I think I might know what's wrong. But I need to be sure before I say anything." "Tell me," Nietzsche insisted. "Even if you're not certain." Grace took a deep breath. "In St. Louis, before my husband died, there was a traveling doctor who came through town. He was teaching other doctors about eye problems. I went to see him because I was desperate for anything that might help Thomas. But Thomas was born blind, his eyes were formed wrong inside. Nothing could help him." She paused, gathering her courage. "But this doctor talked about another kind of blindness, one caused by something called cataracts. It's like a cloud that grows over the eyes, blocking the sight. Sometimes fever or injury can cause them, especially in children. Can they be removed?" "These clouds?" Nietzsche's voice was suddenly intense, focused. The doctor said yes sometimes. He had successfully done surgeries to remove them. I saw one of his patients, an older man who had been blind for years. After the surgery, he could see again. Not perfectly, but he could see. Nietzsche grabbed Grace's arms, his grip almost painful in his excitement. "You're saying Kaya might not have to be blind forever? He could see again?" "Maybe," Grace said carefully, trying not to let hope run wild. "If what he has are cataracts, and if we could find a skilled doctor, and if the surgery works, then yes, maybe he could see again. But those are a lot of ifs, Nietzsche. I need to examine him first to be more sure." The chief let go of her arms and turned away, his hand shaking. For years he had accepted that Kaya would never see. He had mourned the loss of his son's sight the way he mourned the loss of his wife. It was a grief he had learned to carry, heavy but familiar. Now Grace was telling him that maybe, just maybe, that grief didn't have to be permanent. "When can you examine him?" Nietzsche asked. "Tomorrow, when the sun is high and bright. I'll need good light to see properly." That night Nietzsche couldn't sleep at all. He lay awake, staring at the smoke hole in the roof, his mind spinning with possibilities and fears. What if Grace was right? What if Kaya could see again? But what if she was wrong? What if he let himself hope and then had to face disappointment? And even if she was right about the cataracts, where would they find this doctor? The white settlements were dangerous for Apache people. The soldiers shot first and asked questions later. How could he possibly take Kaya into that world to seek help? The next morning, Kaya woke up tired and confused with no memory of the seizure. Grace explained what had happened in simple terms, not wanting to frighten him. Then, as the sun climbed high in the sky, she asked to look at his eyes. Kaya sat still while Grace tilted his face toward the bright sunlight. She moved his head gently from side to side, looking closely at his eyes from different angles. Nietzsche stood nearby, hardly breathing, watching every expression that crossed Grace's face. After several long minutes, Grace sat back. Her face was serious, but there was something in her eyes. Hope, maybe. Or determination. Well, Nietzsche couldn't wait any longer. "What do you see?" Grace looked at him, then at Kaya, then back at Nietzsche. "I see cataracts. They're thick and they cover most of his vision, but I can see them. They look like clouds or a milky covering over the colored part of his eyes." "What does that mean?" Kaya asked, his voice small and confused. Grace took the boy's hands in hers. "It means that you're not blind because your eyes don't work. You're blind because there's something blocking your eyes, like a curtain drawn over a window. The window is still there, still good. It's just covered up. Can the curtain be removed? Kaya's voice was suddenly filled with hope. A dangerous thing to give a child. Grace looked at Nietzsche, silently asking for permission to continue. The chief nodded slowly. Maybe, Grace said honestly. There are doctors, special doctors who know how to do a surgery to remove cataracts. If we could find one and if the surgery worked, you might be able to see again. Kaya's face transformed with pure joy. I could see. I could see your face, Father. I could see the sky and the horses and everything. Nietzsche knelt beside his son, his heart breaking and soaring at the same time. Maybe, my son. But it would be very difficult. These doctors are in the white settlements far from here. It would be dangerous. I don't care about danger, Kaya said fiercely. I want to see. I want to see more than anything. Grace looked at Nietzsche over the boy's head. Their eyes met, and in that moment they both knew that everything had changed. There was no going back to just accepting Kaya's blindness now. Now there was hope. And hope was both the most wonderful and most terrible thing in the world. We need to talk, Grace said quietly to Nietzsche. Alone. They left Kaya with Desba and walked to the edge of the camp where they could speak privately. Grace turned to face the chief, her expression serious. If you want to pursue this, we need to move quickly, she said. Cataracts can get worse over time. And there's another thing. The seizure worries me. Sometimes seizures can cause more damage. The sooner we can get Kaya to a doctor, the better his chances. Where would we go? Nietzsche asked. Where is the nearest doctor who could do this surgery? Grace thought hard, trying to remember the conversations she'd had with the traveling doctor. There was a doctor in Santa Fe. I remember the traveling doctor mentioned him. He said this man had studied in Europe, learned the newest techniques for eye surgery. If he's still there, he might be able to help. Santa Fe. Nietzsche said the words like they tasted bitter. That's at least 2 weeks' travel, maybe more. Through territories with soldiers, through towns where they hang Apache people just for being Apache. I know, Grace said quietly. It would be incredibly dangerous. And even if we got there, what makes you think this doctor would help an Apache child? Nietzsche's voice was hard with old pain. White doctors don't help our people. Grace was silent for a moment, then spoke carefully. What if he wasn't traveling as an Apache child? What if he was traveling as my son? Nietzsche stared at her. What are you suggesting? The council meeting that night was one of the most heated Chief Nietzsche had ever called. When he announced his plan to travel into white territory with Grace and Kaya, seeking a doctor who might restore his son's sight, the reaction was explosive. This is madness. Red Hawk stood up, his face dark with anger. You want to walk into the enemy's land, trust a white woman, and put your son's life in danger for something that might not even work? My son has a chance to see again, Nietzsche replied firmly. How can I not take that chance? Because it's a fool's hope, another warrior argued. The white woman could be lying, leading you into a trap. The moment you reach a settlement, she could turn you in to the soldiers. They'd hang you and take the boy. Grace wouldn't do that, Nietzsche said, but even he heard the uncertainty in his own voice. Could he truly trust her that much? The medicine man spoke up, his voice thoughtful. I have seen these white doctors work before. They have knowledge we don't possess. Ways of healing that seem like magic. If this woman says there's a doctor who can help Kaya, she might be speaking truth. He paused, but the danger is real. The chief would be risking everything. Desba, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I have watched this white woman for weeks now. I have seen how she cares for Kaya, how gentle she is, how patient. I have seen her cry when she thinks no one is watching, crying for her own lost son. That kind of grief cannot be faked. The old woman looked directly at Red Hawk. She loves that boy, not because she has to, but because her heart needs to. She wouldn't lead him into danger. You're all forgetting something, Red Hawk said sharply. Even if the white woman is honest, even if this doctor exists, how will the chief get there safely? He'll be recognized as Apache the moment anyone sees him. His hair, his clothes, the way he moves. No disguise will hide what he is. Grace, who had been standing quietly at the edge of the meeting circle, finally spoke up. Then we change everything. His hair, his clothes, his appearance. I can teach him how to walk differently, talk differently. It won't be perfect, but if we're careful, if we avoid places with many people, we might pass. Might, Red Hawk repeated bitterly. You're asking our chief to risk his life on might. I'm not asking him to do anything, Grace said calmly. This is his choice. All I'm doing is offering to help if he decides to go. Nige looked around at his council, at the worried and angry faces of people who cared about him and his son. Then he thought about Kaya, about the joy on the boy's face when he learned he might see again. How could he deny his son that chance, even if it was dangerous? I'm going, he said finally, his voice leaving no room for argument. I'm the chief, but I'm also a father. And as a father, I have to try. I have to know that I did everything possible to help my son. Red Hawk shook his head in disgust. And if you die out there, if you're captured or killed, what happens to your people then? We need a chief, Nige. Your responsibility is to all of us, not just to one boy. My son is part of all of us, Nige replied. And if I don't come back, the council will choose a new chief, as has always been done. But I can't live with myself if I don't try to help Kaya when help might be possible. The arguments went on for hours, but in the end, Nige's decision stood. He would make the journey. The council agreed on only one condition. He would take 2 warriors with him, men who would travel separately and watch from a distance, ready to help if needed. Over the next few days, Grace worked to transform Nige's appearance. She cut his long hair short in the style white men wore. She traded with some of the other captives for clothes that looked more like settler clothing, a shirt and pants instead of traditional Apache dress. She taught him to walk with less purpose, more carelessly, the way she said white men walked when they weren't on the hunt. The hardest part was teaching him to control his expressions. Apache men are taught to show no emotion, to keep everything inside, Grace explained. But white men are different. They smile more, they look more relaxed, they show what they're feeling on their faces. You'll need to do the same, or people will notice something is different about you. Nige practiced in front of Grace, trying to smile naturally, trying to look casual and unthreatening. It felt wrong, like wearing someone else's skin. But he kept practicing because his son's future depended on it. Kaya was excited beyond measure. He talked constantly about all the things he would see once the doctor fixed his eyes. I want to see your face first, father, he would say. Then I want to see a horse up close. And the sky. Grace says the sky is blue, but I don't even know what blue looks like. Grace would listen to these conversations with a sad smile. She had warned both Nige and Kaya that the surgery might not work, that Kaya's hopes shouldn't be too high. But how could you tell a 12-year-old boy not to hope when hope was the most precious thing he'd ever been given? Finally, the day came to leave. Nige stood at the edge of the camp in his strange new clothes, feeling exposed and uncomfortable. Grace stood beside him in a dress that the other captives had helped make more presentable. Kaya held both their hands, his walking stick in his other hand, ready for the greatest adventure of his life. The whole camp had gathered to see them off. Even Red Hawk was there, his face still disapproving, but his voice softer when he spoke. Come back safe, Chief. Your people need you. I will try, Nige promised. Then in front of everyone, he did something unexpected. He turned to Grace and spoke formally. I am placing my son's life and my own life in your hands. I trust you to guide us safely. I trust you to keep your word. Do you accept this responsibility? Grace understood the weight of what he was asking. In front of all these witnesses, he was publicly declaring his trust in her. If she betrayed that trust, if she led them into danger or used this opportunity to escape, everyone here would know. Her reputation, such as it was, hung on her answer. I accept, she said clearly. I will protect Kaya with my life. I will guide you both safely to the doctor and back again. This I promise. Desba stepped forward and handed Grace a small leather pouch. Medicine herbs, she said quietly, in case the boy gets sick on the journey. You'll know how to use them better than these men. Grace accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, tucking it carefully into her bag. Then they were off, walking out of the canyon as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Naiche carried their supplies. Grace held Kaya's hand, describing the landscape as they walked, keeping up her usual practice of helping him understand his surroundings through words and sounds. The 2 warriors who would shadow them had left before dawn, getting into position to watch from a distance. Naiche knew they were there somewhere, hidden in the rocks and brush, but he couldn't see them. It was both comforting and unsettling to know he wasn't completely alone, but also that he couldn't rely on them unless something went terribly wrong. For the first 3 days, they traveled through Apache territory and Naiche felt relatively safe. They moved carefully, avoiding the paths that soldiers might patrol, staying close to cover. At night, they made small fires that couldn't be seen from far away. and they took turns keeping watch. Grace used this time to coach Nietzsche more on how to act in white settlements. She taught him English phrases that would be useful, worked on his accent, explained the customs he would need to follow. If someone speaks to you, smile and be friendly. Don't stare people in the eyes too long. That makes white folks nervous. And let me do most of the talking, especially to women. They'll feel safer talking to another woman. This is exhausting, Nietzsche admitted one night after hours of practice. How do your people live like this, always pretending, always wearing masks? Not everyone sees it as pretending, Grace said gently. They just think it's being polite. But I understand what you mean. Apache ways are more honest in some ways. What you see is what you get. On the fourth day, they crossed into territory that was no longer safe. Settlements were closer now, and soldier patrols were common. Nietzsche cut his speech down to almost nothing, afraid his accent would give him away. He let Grace handle all interactions with the few travelers they passed on the road. Good morning, Grace would call out cheerfully to anyone they met. Lovely weather for traveling. People would nod, sometimes stop to chat briefly. Grace would tell them she and her husband were taking their son to see a doctor in Santa Fe for his eyes. People would make sympathetic noises and wish them well. No one suspected anything, but Nietzsche's heart pounded every time someone looked at him. He was sure they would see through the disguise, sure someone would call out that he was Apache. He forced himself to smile, to nod, to act casual, even though every instinct screamed at him to run. Kaya, surprisingly, was the calmest of all of them. The boy couldn't see the danger, couldn't see the suspicious looks some people gave Nietzsche before accepting Grace's friendly explanations. To Kaya, this was just an exciting journey, a big adventure that would end with him being able to see. Tell me about Santa Fe, Kaya would ask during their walks. What will it look like? Grace would describe the adobe buildings, the plaza in the center of town, the markets and churches. Nietzsche would listen too, trying to picture the place where his son's fate would be decided. It sounded crowded, busy, full of people, everything he had learned to avoid his whole life. Grace stepped forward slightly, positioning herself between the dangerous man and Nietzsche. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her voice light and friendly. Oh, my husband has one of those faces. People always think they know him from somewhere. We're just simple folks trying to help our boy. Now, if you'll excuse us, we really need to keep moving. The doctor is expecting us. The man on the horse continued to stare at Nietzsche, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. The tension stretched out for what felt like forever. Nietzsche kept his head slightly down, trying to look sick and unthreatening even though every muscle in his body was coiled and ready to fight. Then Kaya did something unexpected. The boy suddenly stumbled forward, his walking stick clattering to the ground. He fell to his knees and started making retching sounds like he was about to be sick. Oh dear. Grace rushed to Kaya's side, helping him up. Not again. The poor child has been sick all morning. We really must hurry. The men on horses backed away slightly, clearly not wanting to be near someone who might vomit on them. The suspicious man's face twisted with disgust. Yeah, you better get him to that doctor, and keep him away from us. As the men rode off, Kaya whispered to Grace, Are they gone? Yes, sweetheart, they're gone. That was very clever of you. I heard something bad in that man's voice, Kaya said quietly. I thought if I acted sick, they might leave faster. Nietzsche picked up Kaya's walking stick and handed it back to him, his hand trembling slightly. That had been too close. If Kaya hadn't created that distraction, if Grace hadn't stepped in so smoothly, things could have gone very badly. We need to be more careful, Nietzsche said once they were far enough away from the settlement to feel safe talking. That man almost recognized me. The closer we get to Santa Fe, the more dangerous it becomes, Grace admitted. There will be more people, more chances for someone to see through the disguise. She thought for a moment. We should travel at odd hours, early morning and late evening when fewer people are on the roads. And maybe we should camp away from towns, avoid interactions when possible. They adjusted their travel pattern after that, moving in the quiet hours and resting during the busiest parts of the day. It made the journey longer but safer. The two warriors shadowing them continued to watch from a distance, never revealing themselves but occasionally leaving small signs to let Nietzsche know they were still there. As they got closer to Santa Fe, the landscape changed. There were more farms, more houses, more signs of white settlement. Nietzsche had never been this deep into white territory before, and everything about it made him uncomfortable. The straight roads, the fenced lands, the way everything was controlled and contained. It felt wrong. How much farther? Kaya asked one evening as they made camp. Maybe 4 or 5 more days if we're careful, Grace replied. Then we'll be in Santa Fe and we can find the doctor. Do you really think he can help me? Kaya's voice was small, vulnerable in a way it hadn't been in weeks. Grace pulled the boy close. I think he can try, and trying is all we can ask for. Nietzsche watched them together and felt a strange ache in his chest. Over the past weeks, Grace had become so much more than just someone helping his son. She had become part of their small family, someone Kaya relied on, someone even Nietzsche had learned to depend on. What would happen after this journey was over? Would Grace want to return to the camp, or would she ask to stay in Santa Fe, to return to her own people? The question bothered him more than it should have. On the 11th day of their journey, they finally saw Santa Fe in the distance. The town was bigger than Nietzsche had imagined, with buildings spreading out across the valley. His stomach twisted with fear and anticipation. Somewhere in that town was the doctor who might give Kaya his sight. But also in that town were hundreds of white people, soldiers, lawmen. Any one of them might see through his disguise. We'll go in tomorrow morning, Grace decided. Early, when the streets aren't too crowded. We'll find the doctor's office, see if he can help, and then leave as quickly as possible. That night, none of them slept well. Kaya tossed and turned, too excited and nervous. Nietzsche lay awake, planning escape routes, thinking through everything that could go wrong. And Grace sat by the fire, her face troubled. What's wrong? Nietzsche asked her quietly, not wanting to wake Kaya. Grace was silent for a long moment. I keep thinking about all the ways this could fail. What if the doctor isn't there anymore? What if he won't help? What if the surgery goes wrong? She looked at Nietzsche with worried eyes. I've given you hope, given Kaya hope, but what if it's false hope? What if I've just made everything worse? Nietzsche moved to sit beside her. You've given my son something to dream about. Even if it doesn't work out, that's not nothing. Before you came, Kaya had given up on life. Now he fights for it. That's because of you. But if he's disappointed, then he'll learn that disappointment is part of life, Nietzsche said firmly. But at least he'll know we tried. At least he'll know his father loved him enough to risk everything for him. Grace wiped at her eyes. You're braver than I am. When Thomas was sick, when I knew he was dying, I couldn't accept it. I kept trying potions and prayers and anything anyone suggested, even when I knew it was hopeless. I couldn't let go, and when he died anyway, I felt like I had failed him. You didn't fail him, Nietzsche said gently. You fought for him until the end. That's what parents do. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, both lost in their own thoughts and fears about what tomorrow would bring. Morning came too quickly. They entered Santa Fe just after dawn, when the streets were still relatively empty. Grace led the way, holding Kaya's hand, with Nietzsche walking beside them, trying to look casual and normal, even though his heart was racing. The town was overwhelming. So many buildings, so many people, even at this early hour. The smell of cooking food, horse manure, smoke from chimneys, sounds of wagons rattling, dogs barking, people calling out to each other. It was chaos compared to the quiet of the canyon settlement. Grace stopped at a general store and asked the shopkeeper about the doctor who specialized in eye problems. The man gave them directions to a building at the edge of the plaza. Dr. Heinrich Müller, the shopkeeper said. He's the one you want. Studied in Europe, does all sorts of fancy medical things. Charges fancy prices, too. Grace thanked him and they made their way to the address. The building was neat and well-maintained, with a sign hanging outside that read, Dr. H. Müller, physician and surgeon. This is it, Grace said, her voice tight with nervousness. Are you ready? Nietzsche nodded. Kaya squeezed Grace's hand tighter. They went inside. The waiting room was small and clean, with a few chairs and medical charts on the walls. An older woman sat at a desk writing in a ledger. She looked up as they entered. Can I help you? She asked, her voice professional but not unkind. Grace took a breath and stepped forward. Yes, we're here to see Dr. Müller about our son's eyes. He's blind, and we were told the doctor might be able to help. The woman studied them for a moment, then looked at Kaya. What's wrong with his eyes? We believe he has cataracts, Grace said. They developed after a severe fever when he was young. The woman's expression changed, became more interested. Cataracts in a child are unusual but not unheard of. Dr. Müller has successfully performed cataract surgeries before. She stood up. Wait here. I'll see if the doctor can examine him today. She disappeared through a door, leaving them alone in the waiting room. The minutes felt like hours. Nietzsche stood stiffly, hyper-aware of every sound, every person who walked past the window outside. Kaya sat in one of the chairs, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Grace paced nervously. Finally, the woman returned. Dr. Muller will see you now. Follow me. They were led into an examination room where a man in his 50s stood waiting. He had gray hair, sharp eyes, and the confident manner of someone who knew his skills were valuable. He looked at them with curiosity, his gaze lingering for a moment on Nietzsche before moving to Kaya. So, Dr. Muller said in accented English, you have a blind boy who you believe has cataracts. Come here, child, let me see. Kaya stood up, and Grace gently guided him to stand in front of the doctor. Dr. Muller tilted Kaya's face toward the light coming through the window, looking closely at his eyes. Dr. Muller examined Kaya's eyes for several long minutes, using various instruments and holding the boy's face at different angles to catch the light. He asked questions about when the blindness started, what symptoms came before it, whether Kaya had any pain. Grace answered most of the questions while Nietzsche stood tensely in the corner, trying to look like a worried father and nothing more. Finally, the doctor stepped back and nodded slowly. Yes, these are definitely cataracts, quite advanced ones. They've clouded the entire lens in both eyes. He looked at Grace. You were right to bring him here. Left untreated, these will never improve on their own. Can you help him? Grace's voice trembled with hope and fear. Can you do the surgery? Dr. Muller stroked his beard thoughtfully. I can. I've performed this operation many times, though rarely on someone so young. The surgery is delicate and there are risks. Infection is always a possibility, and there's no guarantee of full sight restoration. But I'd estimate a 70% chance of significant improvement. He may not see perfectly, but he would see. 70%. Those words hung in the air like a promise and a threat all at once. What do we need to do? Nietzsche asked, speaking for the first time. His accent was heavier than he intended, and he saw the doctor's eyes narrow slightly with curiosity. The surgery would need to be done soon. Within the next few days while you're here, Dr. Muller said. Recovery takes about 2 weeks. The boy would need to stay very still, keep bandages on his eyes, avoid any strain. After that, we remove the bandages and see how successful the operation was. 2 weeks? Nietzsche's mind raced. They couldn't stay in Santa Fe for 2 weeks. Every day here increased the risk of discovery. But what choice did they have? That's a long time, Grace said carefully, echoing Nietzsche's concerns. Is there any way to make it shorter? I'm afraid not. The eyes need time to heal properly. Dr. Muller looked between them. I sense you're in a hurry to leave town. May I ask why? We just don't like being away from home so long, Grace said quickly. We have a small farm, animals to care for. The doctor didn't look entirely convinced, but he let it pass. Well, if you want to proceed, we should schedule the surgery for tomorrow morning. The cost will be $50, half now and half after the surgery. $50. It was a fortune. Nietzsche had anticipated this and had brought valuable items to trade, things taken during raids that he could sell. But selling them without drawing attention would be tricky. We'll pay, Grace said firmly. Whatever it takes, Dr. Muller nodded. Very well. Bring the boy back tomorrow at 8 in the morning. He shouldn't eat anything after sunset tonight, and make sure he gets a good night's sleep. As they left the doctor's office, Nietzsche felt like he was walking through a dream. This was really happening. Tomorrow, a white doctor would cut into his son's eyes and try to give him sight. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. They found a small boarding house on the edge of town where Grace negotiated a room for the night. The landlady was a chatty woman who asked too many questions, but Grace handled her smoothly, spinning a story about their farm in Colorado and their poor blind son. That evening, Nietzsche sold some of the trade goods at a pawn shop, getting enough money for the doctor's fee. The shop owner tried to cheat him on the price, but Nietzsche stood firm, and eventually got a fair deal. Back in their room, as the sun set and Kaya ate his last meal before the surgery, Grace suddenly stood up and walked to the window. She stood there for a long time looking out at the darkening street. Grace? Kaya called out. Where did you go? I'm right here, sweetheart. Just looking out the window, but Nietzsche could see her shoulders shaking. He went to stand beside her and saw tears running down her face. What's wrong? He asked quietly. Grace wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. I just realized something. Something that I should have understood weeks ago, but I was so focused on helping Kaya that I didn't see it. See what? She turned to face him, and in her eyes was a mixture of sadness and wonder. I could leave right now. I could walk out of this boarding house, go to the lawmen, tell them you're Apache. They'd arrest you, take Kaya away, and I'd be free. I could go anywhere, do anything. Start a new life. Nietzsche felt his blood run cold. She was right. They were completely at her mercy here. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to understand what I'm about to say. Grace took a shaky breath. I've had a dozen chances to escape during this journey. Every town we passed, every person we met, I could have called for help. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid you'd hurt me, and not because of any bargain we made back at your camp. Then why? Nietzsche's voice was barely a whisper. Because somewhere along the way, you and Kaya stopped being my captors and became my family. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I lost everything when my husband and son died. I thought I would never feel like I belonged anywhere again. But then I found you two, or you found me. And when I'm with you, when I'm teaching Kaya and talking with you by the fire, I feel like I have a home again. Not a place, but people who need me, people I care about. Nietzsche stood frozen, unable to speak. He had not expected this confession, had not prepared himself for the emotions it stirred up. Grace continued, her words tumbling out now. I know it's strange. I know it doesn't make sense. You're Apache, I'm white. Your people and my people are enemies. By all logic, I should hate you or at least fear you. But I don't. When I look at you, I see a father who loves his son enough to risk everything for him. When I look at Kaya, I see a brave boy who deserves every chance at happiness. And when I think about going back to white society, living among people who treat me like I'm cursed because I'm a widow, I feel nothing but emptiness. So you'll stay with us? Nietzsche asked. Even after the surgery, after Kaya can see, you'll come back to the camp? If you'll have me, Grace said simply. Not as a captive anymore, but as someone who chooses to be there. Someone who wants to be part of your lives. Nietzsche felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been locked tight since his wife died. He reached out and took Grace's hands in his, a gesture that would have been scandalous in either of their cultures but felt perfectly natural in this moment. You are already part of our lives, he said quietly. You've been part of us since the moment you sat with my son and made him laugh again. And yes, we want you to stay, not as a captive, not as a servant, but as, he struggled to find the right word, as family. They stood like that for a long moment, hands clasped, understanding passing between them that needed no words. Then Kaya's voice broke the silence. Are you two holding hands? The boy asked from across the room. His head tilted in that way he had when he was trying to understand something he couldn't see. Grace laughed through her tears. Yes, we are. Good, Kaya said with satisfaction. I like it when you're both happy. It makes the air feel lighter. That night they all slept in the same room, Grace and Kaya in the bed, Nietzsche on the floor nearby. But before they slept, Grace did something unexpected. She pulled out the small leather pouch Desba had given her and opened it carefully. I've been saving this for the right moment, she said. She took out some of the herbs and made a simple tea, the kind that helped with anxiety and peaceful sleep. She gave some to Kaya, drank some herself, and offered the rest to Nietzsche. It will help, she said. Tomorrow is a big day. We all need rest. As Nietzsche drank the bitter tea, he marveled at how this white woman had learned to use Apache medicine, how she had taken pieces of his culture and made them her own. She was bridging two worlds, standing in the space between them and proving that maybe, just maybe, those worlds didn't have to be enemies. The next morning came too soon. They walked to Dr. Muller's office in silence, each lost in their own thoughts and prayers. Kaya held both their hands, trying to be brave but unable to hide his nervousness. The surgery lasted 3 hours. Nietzsche and Grace sat in the waiting room, not speaking, just existing together in shared fear and hope. Grace prayed to her God. Nietzsche sent his thoughts to the spirits of his ancestors. Both asked for the same thing. Please let this work. Please let the boy see. When Dr. Muller finally emerged, he looked tired but pleased. The surgery went well. Both cataracts were successfully removed. Now we wait to see how he heals. Kaya was brought out, his eyes heavily bandaged, still drowsy from the medicine the doctor had given him for the pain. They took him back to the boarding house, where Grace tended to him with the skill of someone who had nursed sick children before. The next 2 weeks were the longest of Nietzsche's life. Every day brought new dangers. Soldiers patrolled the streets regularly. Twice lawmen came to the boarding house asking questions about strangers in town. Grace handled them perfectly each time, playing the role of a worried mother caring for her sick son. The warriors who had followed them sent subtle signals that they were still watching, still ready to help if needed. But as the days passed and nothing went wrong, Nietzsche began to believe they might actually make it through this. Kaya was a model patient, following every instruction, staying still, not complaining even when his eyes itched terribly under the bandages. Grace read to him for hours, told him stories, described everything she saw outside the window.